Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Ukraine agrees to a Trump-brokered peace plan after Russian talks take place in Abu Dhabi as deadly strikes on both sides continue. Hamas and Islamic Jihad hand over hostage remains as Israel warns of ceasefire violations. Hundreds of children remain missing following a school kidnapping as violence spreads across Nigeria. Ukraine has agreed to a Trump-brokered peace plan with a few minor details still to be finalised. The reports follow talks in Abu Dhabi between US, Russian and Ukrainian officials after Washington's original 28-point plan was streamlined to 19 points in Geneva. The meeting came amid deadly overnight strikes on Kyiv and Russian border regions. To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Dubai 92 presenter Jono and Managing Director of This is Dubai, Michael Jabri Pickett. Jonathan and Michael, great to have you both in the studio with me. There's been lots and lots of moving parts happening today when it comes to the Ukraine-Russian talks and US talks, and there seems to be a lot of manoeuvring. So, Jono, it looks like we might have a deal right now on the table. Ukraine has agreed to the essence of it. What happens now?
Well, Kyiv has said it's a yes in principle. I guess it's going to be over to the lawyers, negotiators to try and iron out the bits and pieces of this 19-point framework into a real-term ceasefire to actually come into place. The timeline as well, we don't have any idea about the timeline of this and what's going to happen next. And also we don't know what Russia's response is going to be just yet. We've heard echoes of what Russia might be thinking about the 19 points that are there, but we know that Zelenskyy and Trump have to sell this at home, first and foremost. That's what has to happen. They both have to go back, and the Ukrainians have sacrificed a lot during this war, and now they're going to be told that inevitably in this 19-point plan, although we don't know the actual terms of there is going to be concessions, and they're going to be quite dramatic. So selling that at home might be a tough one for Vladimir Zelenskyy, but Trump on side for Ukraine is exactly what they need right now, and Europe to back the plans here as well. Now, it's good news from the point of view that Geneva have been involved as well with this, so we know that it's a European-backed plan, so we know that there is some credence behind it. But this is going to come down to what Putin thinks, and if he's actually going to say, I'm okay with these points or not, because a ceasefire and any sort of a peace deal being brokered from one side is simply negotiations that have never gone to fruition, and that's a concern.
It is absolutely a concern, Michael, and we do know that, as John has said, still haven't heard from the Russians. There has been a few words from Sergei Lavrov. The mood music really coming out of the Kremlin is what to be expected. They haven't seen this new deal, the 19-point one. They really wanted what was discussed in Alaska, which was the 28-point plan, which had Russians' fingerprints all over it. This is a tricky situation that we remain in, because I also think the big question is, does Ukraine or Russia run out of money first? And is that the end game? Like, does Ukraine have the ability to carry on going?
It's going to be a tough situation for both parties. We've discussed that Ukraine is trying to battle on a daily basis everything that Russia's throwing at them. Meanwhile, Russia is making inroads on the battlefield. Russia seems to be okay with sacrificing more and more people, more and more of their soldiers. Ukrainians are just trying to hold the Russians at bay as best they can. And it's becoming incredibly tricky for both sides for different reasons. Russia, I don't know that they can be an outsider within the international community forever. And it's been 45 months now since the invasion in February of 2022. At a certain point, the Russians are going to need the international community for their economy to kick back in. So they both have reasons to come together for a deal, but they also, I think, both have reasons to sort of dig their heels in and to make this as protracted as possible so that they can get the concessions that both sides want.
I do think one thing, though, we talk a lot about the Europeans and the coalition of the willing, and we've discussed that normally they have talks about talks, and the Europeans have been slow to pull the trigger when Ukraine have need their help when it comes to weapons. You know, there seems to be always these big discussions happening. But actually, I think the Europeans and the coalition of the willing have actually scored a couple of big wins this week. They managed to push back that Thursday deadline that Donald Trump wanted Ukraine to have signed a deal by then. And also they got rid of that 28-point plan and they put the 19-point plan in place. So I think the Europeans here and the coalition of the willing have actually kind of come to Ukraine's rescue.
Somewhat, but I think the big win here will be Ukraine and US being aligned. Trump being on Ukraine's side to a degree is certainly what needs to happen here for this to be in any way a win. Because when, as Michael rightly said, it's about, I guess, who's going to lose out first. And Russia has the military might. Russia probably realistically also has the financial ability to continue this war and protract it for as long as they would like to do. Ukraine hasn't got the same leverage, so to speak. And the request as well for the missiles coming through from Ukraine, no one in Europe kind of wants to say, okay, let's give them to you. Certainly no one wants to give them for free. So this is costing money, this is costing lives, and Ukraine's about to head into a winter offensive that it really can't afford to go back into again. Russia historically have done very well on winter offensives. They've been through enough of them at this stage. And I think Ukraine is trying to find somewhat of a win, or somewhat of at least a slowdown or a stall before we head into those next couple of months when it's going to be brutally cold for them to have to fight anything on the ground. And then you're looking at things like drone attacks and strikes and missiles, and that's all going to cost a lot more money than on-ground offensives.
And also, Michael, we are hearing that Zelenskyy is expected in the US in the coming days, really to iron out these finer details, delicate issues. What can we expect from that meeting? And of course, we can't forget that Thursday is actually Thanksgiving in the United States, so it's a pretty big holiday.
And Donald Trump will be in Mar-a-Lago, and the thinking is that President Zelenskyy will go down there. I think President Zelenskyy is going to be on a charmed offensive. He's going to be trying to win over as many Republicans and Democrats to his side as possible. He was inspired by the Gaza ceasefire. He recognized that if he's standing on the sidelines, and I'm sure that that original first draft, that 28-point plan, probably scared him an awful lot. If I'm not on board and on board quickly and on Donald Trump's side, I'm going to get just steamrolled. I need to make sure that my biggest ally, my strongest supporter, is Donald Trump. If Donald Trump has the Ukrainian president's back, then it will be the two of them against Putin, and that will keep the Ukrainian president and the Ukrainians safe, knowing that their big brother is there watching out for him.
It's quite interesting that you say that, though, because I do think that if we look at the administration, especially the US one, we're looking at Steve Witkoff. I know he's not a diplomat, but he's close to Donald Trump. Of course, he helped broker the Gaza ceasefire deal. He's been very close to Kirill Dmitriev, who is the Russian financial guy who this plan apparently originated with. So I think we have to be cautious about how many hawks there are in Donald Trump's cabinet when it comes to Russia, because I do think that there is still influence from Steve Witkoff, who is a fan of Russia. Marco Rubio may be a little bit more hawkish, but I would wonder how far Donald Trump would turn considering who's behind him in the administration.
I think the tricky part is that so many of the personnel in the administration seem to have more of a friendly approach to Vladimir Putin than to them being hawks. I think that they would much rather, and Steve Witkoff has said that he doesn't think that Donald Trump is all that bad of a guy. And I think he feels very comfortable having those conversations. He has not traveled to Ukraine, but he has traveled to Russia many times. And that seems to be his comfort zone. I think the administration really does take their cues from the president, and the president really does respect people who are negotiating from positions of power, and that's definitely what Vladimir Putin is doing.
And I think it will be secure. The security assurances that Vladimir Zelenskyy is looking for from the US are not something that's going to be forthcoming. I think the administration has been very clear about that in the past. Any security assurances will come from within Europe. So I think he going over there more than anything else is to kind of massage the ego of the US government more than anything else. It's probably not to go over there for those security assurances, which he knows already. He's been told he's not going to get them from the US, but he will get that big brother figure just without any troops on the ground. We know that that's not something they're going to get involved in.
And Zelenskyy cannot risk a bust-up that we saw in the Oval Office again. Like, it just can't happen. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that, Michael and Jono. Stay right there now as we move on to another story. And the US and Israel-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is winding down its controversial aid operations in Gaza after 6 months. The group, which bypassed the UN, has delivered over 187 million meals amid deadly chaos at its sites. While Washington hails its role in facilitating a ceasefire, Hamas and human rights groups called for the accountability over the deaths of hundreds of Palestinians. Michael, let's start with this, because the GHF, as we know, was always seen as extremely controversial. How has this news of the closure of it gone down in Gaza?
So it's been welcomed by Palestinians. It's, for what it's worth, it's been welcomed by Hamas,
Yes.
which is a terrorist organization. It has the various humanitarian organizations have said it won't affect us because we don't deal with them. The majority of people who have been watching the situation unfold for the last 2 years in Gaza are thinking that this is an incredibly good situation for them to go away, because the UN themselves has said that they've weaponized aid. The distribution sites, of which there were only 4, as opposed to the 400 that there are today and there were before, the distribution sites have been classified as death traps, and they are. The GHF has been started and run by the Israeli and the American governments. And there just hasn't been the optics that this is an independent organization, and too often the people who were in charge of distributing the food at these sites, they were not handling the situation well, because there were crowds, because you had gone from 400 sites down to 4, and there was so much. I mean, we saw the videos, we saw the photographs of children with empty bowls trying to get as much food as possible. It was horrific, and it was handled badly because people would rush in for the food, and then there'd be shooting. As many as 1,000 Palestinians were killed in the vicinity of these sites. So they don't have a good track record in any way, shape, or form. Also, it was while they were in charge that the international community said that there's a man-made famine that's taking place there. So there's nothing that they can point to, despite the posts on X and various social media platforms from some of the government officials saying, no, actually they did a good job. Nobody who's independent would say that they did a good job.
And it's really interesting because earlier I was speaking to someone from UNRWA, the UN organization, who, of course, was banned from the Gaza Strip by Israel because they were believed to have an affiliation with Hamas. Israel's never been able to give evidence for this. UNRWA has always said it's completely not true. But they said they've got tons and tons of aid waiting at the border, Jono, especially in these freezing temperatures, that they just cannot get in.
Well, the GHF has been a farce from the get-go. Aside from the fact that it's been a death trap, it is a bunch of people who've had no experience whatsoever in distributing aid of any kind in any sort of a war zone, who've taken it upon themselves to try and feed and distribute 189 million meals. The whole thought of it, the whole process of somebody starting from scratch in some field that they've got no idea about and trying to initiate that is farcical when you think about it. It was a badly thought out plan. It was something that gave Israel what they saw as some level of control over the distribution of the aid. 4 centres cannot replace 400 centres, and it certainly can't do it when you're working with people who've had zero experience in this field before. You don't open a restaurant and have 0 chefs and say this is going to work out fine. You've effectively done this with people who are from a completely different industry and have gone in there to try and run the GHF. So from the get-go, this was doomed for failure. We've seen the videos, regardless of what Israel have said. We've seen the videos of what has been happening there. We've seen people who'd been shot because there were scenes of carnage.
And at that time, I remember I did speak to a doctor, a Palestinian doctor, who was working inside of Gaza, and he said to me that people coming in from those GHF sites had bullet wounds and had died from them, but they were bullet wounds from the chest up. So it wasn't even warning shots. But obviously this has all been denied by the GHF. But another thing I want to point to you, Jono, and talk to you about is Hamas has handed over the remains of another Israeli hostage today. What more do we know? And also, how many more remain?
So, again, it's good news. Anytime you hear of a hostage being handed back, that is good news. That is a step further towards getting towards phase 2 of the peace plan. The hostage was handed back to Israel, the body of that hostage this afternoon. It was recovered in central Gaza. Now, Israeli officials have said that there's 3 more hostages who are being held inside Gaza, so that even this handover is, as you say, for one family, that gives some closure and it brings an end, and we're one step closer to moving on from those 2 weeks ago when we were talking about 15 hostages that still remain, the bodies of those inside Gaza. We're down to 3. Now, what they're saying is they're being held inside Gaza, and I don't think that may be a fair representation, and not to give any credit whatsoever to Hamas, but I feel like perhaps those bodies have just not been found yet, and we're dealing with tons and tons of rubble. We know that there is zero equipment that is on site. Slowly but surely, bit more is getting through, making that job slightly easier, but those 3 bodies have still not been returned. I feel like it's simply perhaps that Hamas cannot locate where those bodies are. But as long as then, we've heard from Netanyahu say previously, as long as there are hostage bodies that remain inside Gaza, phase 2 is not going to get into the full swing of things.
Don't know your thoughts there, Michael, but especially on the hostage situation, it's a very difficult and complicated effort inside of Gaza because, as you say, most of Gaza has been destroyed.
Yeah, there were reports, again, by the UN that as much as 56 million tons of rubble. And that is, you have a cities that were just annihilated. And to try and figure out where bodies would be located now. Also, as Hamas has said, and in this particular instance, I believe them, a lot of the people who were responsible for guarding some of those hostages or bodies, they've also died. So we're not sure where the bodies or the remains can be located.
And Israel would argue that they have evidence and they have, intelligence. And they say they know where Hamas has the bodies, but that's the argument of Israel. But thank you so much for your thoughts there. Let's move on to another story now. And violence and insecurity are surging across northern Nigeria with mass kidnappings, deadly attacks, and rising threats to communities. Hundreds of school children remain missing after being abducted from a school. Jono, let's talk a little bit about this story and what more do we know about these missing children who have reportedly been returned, because about 50 children have been returned and there's still obviously a lot missing.
So since they went missing on Saturday, in the first day or two, yes, 50 kids managed to get away from their kidnappers and make it back to their family from their captors. They've been reunited with their families, as we've heard from church leaders on the ground who are there as well. But there are 250 more children, along with their teachers, who are still missing. Now, here's where things get a bit tricky. Their captors have now taken them to an area which is remote bush, and it is heavily armed gangs who have taken them into this remote bush, who know this area very, very well. The army are now on board to try and get into that area. They're combing huge stretches of land and countryside to try and find them. They lack the expertise for that specific ground that this armed gang have. And you might think, well, why? Why kidnap 300 odd kids plus their teachers from a school? And the simple answer is, and this is speculatively speaking, ransom. And there's a stack of previous examples of this as well. Armed groups kidnap kids to force the families individually, not the government as a whole, to pay large ransoms. The government will be called upon as well to pay ransom towards these groups, and it's becoming a huge source of income to fund criminal gangs within the country, and this is where this has come from. You're dealing with areas where the schools are very remote, and although they may be, in some cases, boarding schools, which I believe this one was, you're also dealing with zero security on ground. So when a gang like this goes in and wants to take 300 odd kids, it is very easy to do it. It's a remote region. There's very little time for the authorities to get involved here as well, and this is political or ideological motives that are at play here. And that is why these kids have gone missing, because on the surface of it, this story is mind-blowing.
And it's really something that's come back into the fore, because I remember 11 years ago reporting on the very similar story, and it was in Chibok in Nigeria, and they did abduct 276, and that was school children. It was very infamous. It made the headlines all over the world. And actually, what's interesting is Donald Trump has got involved in this, Michael. You know, President Donald Trump is saying that they are persecuting Christians in Nigeria, and this has become a big talking point.
Donald Trump feels a kinship to people who look like him or have similar backgrounds. So we know, for instance, with the white South Africans who he's repatriated or repatriated to the States. He's allowing them to come in because he feels that they've been persecuted. In this case, in Nigeria, there are accusations, rumors that maybe Christians are also being persecuted. The government there has said, no, it's sometimes Muslims, it's sometimes Christians. It's the terrorist organizations, the kidnappers are indiscriminate. They don't have, a preference one way or the other. And Donald Trump can be attracted by a news story. The rumor is that he saw something on Fox News, a report about Christians being attacked, and that is what sort of spurred this on. And then you have celebrities, Nicki Minaj, who's getting involved as well. So Donald Trump is somebody who is not necessarily, again, strategic in his foreign policy. He can be very much attracted and swayed by whatever the flavor of the day is.
And let's talk a little bit about, because this is not the only situation in Nigeria at the moment. The World Food Programme predicts nearly 35 million people could actually go hungry in 2026. And that's, of course, next year, fast approaching. How are authorities addressing this particular issue?
So there are limited funds at this point. And what they've recognized is they're going to have to feed the hungriest, which is an incredibly difficult task to figure out who is the hungriest. But that's the way that they have to approach it. There are what they've deemed, the international community, hungry hotspots, of which there are 16 that are at critical levels. And they are also trying to take a more of a long-term approach. What they're going to do is go into communities and try and educate them, but that's not going to give you food today, tomorrow, or in the next few months. They're trying to use tech and more efficient methods. And then they're also going to be trying to generate funding opportunities around the world. When Elon Musk and Doge got rid of US aid, there was a bit of a knock-on effect as well, and other countries cut their programs. So there are estimates that they need about $29 billion to make sure that 35 million people don't go hungry in 2026. And they're so far away from that number that they have to make incredibly difficult decisions. And what it means is that in 2026, there will be a lot of people who will most likely be starving to death.
And it's so sad, because we were talking about the abductions in Nigeria, and now we're talking about 35 million people going hungry, and the desperate situation that's obviously driving.
Exactly. I think it's exactly that. The two are individual stories, but the two are intrinsically linked. There's two schools of thought. One is that this group are objecting to Western ideology when it comes to the school where they're being taught, be it Christian or Muslim schools, the Western ideology in the education system that's in place, which is very akin to Boko Haram's ideology from it's been a while since anyone's mentioned that in a news story. But then there's the school of thought that perhaps this insurgent gang may be feeling the need and the financial pressures to require funding in order to secure food and security and shelter for themselves for the long stint which is on the way, which may be why they're holding kids to ransom. They simply require money for food, knowing that 2026 has got this in store. So both of these stories are intrinsically linked.
And to your point, many of these hotspots, there are repeated attacks, which means there are violence, and then there is economic stress. And there's that cycle that goes around and round. If you're going to be under attack more, you're probably not going to be able to work or work in the fields or go to your job because of the safety issue. And then that leads to economic stress, and it goes around and around.
And we're really seeing that in South Sudan. And that's one of the countries that people are saying people are finding it very difficult to go out to work or to have farming land because of the constant attacks that are happening in the country. But the United Nations has come out today and has condemned a surge in mass kidnappings in north central Nigeria, and they're calling on the government to just do more. So there seems to be this universal chorus happening right now to make sure that people around the world are safe. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Let's move on to another story now. And the US Transportation Secretary has launched a new campaign called To Help Address a Surge in Unruly Passengers. It comes ahead of Thanksgiving, where thousands of Americans do prepare to take long journeys to reach their loved ones. The Etiquette campaign includes a suggested dress code, keeping control of children, and a lesson in general manners. Take a listen.
Manners don't stop at the gate. Things aren't what they used to be. Some would call it the golden age of travel. Let's bring civility and manners back. Ask yourself, are you helping a pregnant woman put her bag in the overhead bin? Are you dressing with respect? Are you keeping control of your children? Are you saying thank you to your flight attendants and your pilots? Are you saying please and thank you in general? The golden age of travel begins with you.
I actually remember having an old black and white TV like that. I do. Anyway, tell us more about this campaign, Michael. And is it a good idea, or is it just old-fashioned?
So first of all, I would say it is a good idea. But I would also say that we have to recognize that as much as I think we would all love the golden age of travel to come back, as much as we would enjoy not seeing the person's feet who's sitting next to you, if we're going to take on all of those characteristics again, which we should, then we also need the same space that we had when we were traveling in the 1950s. Right now, we have budget airlines who are looking at maybe having standing seats. So while I agree with the sentiment of Sean P. Duffy, I don't know that rolling it out with an older white man, and he's 54, younger than me, so I can say that he's an older white man. I don't know that that's the way that it should be done. And what I would say, because I know what you're going to ask, is would it be better if it was an older black man? And I would say, no, what they should be doing is having social media influencers looking at, not like this generation is done, but get the next generation. Make sure that the next generation is saying to their parents, you know what, Mom, we shouldn't be going to the airport in our pajamas. We should be not wearing our flip-flops. We should not be wearing shorts. We should take pride in how we look and how we dress when we're traveling. But I also think that what he's talking about is how we should live our lives. Yeah. This isn't just for when you're traveling and when you're asking a flight attendant for another drink. It has to go a little bit further.
Manners make a man. And that is something that a lot of people have forgotten about. And I do think that Michael does have a point when it does come to that. But Jono, does this border, listen, I'm asking the question, does this border on a nanny state? But let's be honest, you know, something has to be done about these unruly people. But do you want to be told how to dress or give a lesson in manners?
It's risky territory. It does feel a little bit nanny state. We'd rather they focused on things like, you know, the delays or how to have extra leg room or security queues. But what to wear at the airport seems like it should be down the list of priorities. The reminder to be polite, I think, is fine. I think absolutely manners is something that's forgotten. Chivalry is dead in the water, and I think it needs to come back. But when you come down to telling somebody how they need to dress up on board a flight, I think you then risk getting into murky waters as well. Should you be allowed to wear pajamas on the flight? Well, you've paid for that ticket. I think there's a level of decorum that's expected depending on what you're flying in and also what class of travel you're in. And I firmly believe that when I was younger, I was educated to believe that always dress for the upgrade that you might get at the airport, which is why, and I remember vividly at 12 years of age being put on a flight in a full suit on, you know...
Sweating.
Yes, was sweating. As a 12-year-old...
Sweating it out.
You know, in responsible parenting, that was how I was... And I was always educated that, you know, you dress up for a flight, and I still keep that to this day. Yeah. I do judge people when I see them wearing, I'm not going to lie and say I don't, when they wear pajamas on board the flight. Is it their right? I mean, kind of.
They
They
are
paid
so
for their seat.
annoying.
I know, and they're heathens, but at the same time, it's their right. They've bought their ticket as well. And I do always think, and I think for anyone who's flying business or first class, wear what you want. If you want to go in your pajamas, you've bought your seat. You deserve to wear whatever you want. If you want to be comfortable, do what you want. But if you do dress somebody up, you'll act well, and I believe that firmly. Wedding guests are the only exception, but if you dress well, you'll act well.
So I have a different take on this, maybe a little bit more in the thinking that if you go to anywhere that's a public space and you're going to be you're going to be a civilian among the masses, have a bit of respect. Yeah. Like, just have a bit of respect. Put deodorant on, wash your clothes, wear something decent to get on a plane. Okay, it could be comfortable. It doesn't have to be tight jeans or, a corset dress like in the Victorian times. But just have a bit of respect. And I do find that right now, we've lost that respect. People walk around the airport in their slippers with these annoying things around, this thing around their neck. You're not on the flight. Take off the cushion. Just be a bit respectful.
Because you have to dress for, again, it's for where you are, and again, it's appropriately dressed. If you're on a Ryanair flight and you're paying, the equivalent of $20 to get on the flight, then that's the equivalent of saying you've gone to a casual bar. You're not going to wear a tuxedo to go to a casual bar. You're going to wear your skivvies. But if you get on an Emirates flight, you paid a little bit more for your money, or a Qantas flight, and you feel a little bit more upmarket and a bit more classy, then maybe you should dress for that. But they've paid the same amount as you've paid, and they, although you think etiquette-wise that should be how you're dressed, they are entitled to dress how they want.
My big question is, every time I get on a plane, kids are really annoying. People take off their shoes. I want to know, are people keeping their kids under control, Michael? Should they be thinking about this?
Yes, they should be. They should be thinking about this, and no, they're not. And I have kids, and I've traveled with kids, and I've lived overseas with kids. My kids are grown now, and so I do judge. And I will 100% give you a dirty look. The issue that I have with parents, and I've written about this, I've written op-eds about how I would pay more for a flight without children.
Me too.
And I got a lot of hate for it. And I will double down on it. And it's not that I don't love kids. I do. I love my kids. I don't love your kids. And I want that to be clear. And what will really bother me, all the more, now I'm getting on the soapbox, what will really bother me even more is when I see parents who are completely oblivious, or they act as though they are, to their child who is acting inappropriate. If you're a parent and you're making an effort to make sure that your child is not disturbing everybody on the flight, I'll give you all the credit and I'll give you a lot of peace. But if you're making no effort to do anything as a parent, as the caregiver, that's when it becomes incredibly frustrating. And too often, people abdicate their role as a parent, and that's where I get really upset.
I think people treat flights as that as well. They kind of think that that's free babysitting for however long the flight is. And on a 7-hour, if you're on a transatlantic flight and it's a 7-hour long-haul flight, frequently, and this is without a shadow of a doubt, I know people who have sedated their kids many years ago with Calpol. And I think that is the lost art of, I'm not recommending it in current terms, it's a terrible idea, but kids were much more ruly, I think, back in the day. But I think a lot of people see it as kind of a break from the kids.
Absolutely. Have
a couple of drinks, enjoy the flight, and have no parental responsibility.
I would say this, so I live in Canada, it's a 14-hour flight. So 7 hours is a dream.
Yeah.
14-hour flight, and you're behind one row, and that row has 3 children, and the parent is somewhere else. That's where you're prepared to take things into your own hands.
It's always tricky trying to tell somebody what to do with their kids, though, and trying to tell them how to parent them. And you can't really publicly chastise somebody else's kids either, which
you
is
can.
the issue.
Trust me, you can. You can do it.
What? I've actually done it, because I remember I got a flight and the kid was kicking the chair non-stop, and I actually turned around and I said to the mother, this has been 2 hours.
Yep.
Like, you either sit that child down with the seatbelt on, or I'm going to ask to be moved, because I'm also on the same flight as you. No respect.
It's the idea about noise, for instance. You have a right to listen to your music, for instance, but your right ends when it starts to impinge on my right not to listen to it.
Agreed.
And that's where, especially because we are in such close proximity, we are like cattle on flights. It doesn't matter if you're on Emirates or you're on the worst
And I'm not like Jono. I can't afford first class, so I'm in cattle class. So we are really like cattle, aren't we?
Yes, we are.
Enjoy cargo.
And actually, the irony
well
is that you're up in first class or business class in pajamas that they give to
Yes.
you.
But there's plenty of room to change there.
Oh my
I don't know
gosh.
what the issue is.
Jono, I think you've got no argument here until you're with me and Michael in cattle class, and then you know the severity of it all. But thank you so much for your thoughts on that. Now, it's that time of the show where Jono and Michael have chosen two of their quirkiest stories of the day. Jono, gosh, there's only a month to go until Christmas. I actually did not know that. That's crazy. And there's a list of gifts you should never give a loved one. Okay, another what to do and what not to do.
Here's what to not buy over Christmas.
Okay, tell me.
And because we all know what you should buy, and go out there and do your Santa shopping now. On 25th of November, you should be doing that. But this is a warning. It's a public service announcement against fix yourself gifts. These are things that researchers say you have to stay away from.
Okay.
We are talking about gym memberships,
Right.
exercise equipment,
Right.
fitness watches.
Okay.
Weight loss products like tea, like Boo Tea, which I've once tried and would recommend it
I've
to
tried
nobody.
that so many times, it doesn't
To nobody,
work. Yeah.
unless you need a really good cleanse after the festive season. Pre-packed healthy meals or diet plans, gift cards for Botox or any sort of a skin treatment, and also self-help books. They're the things that you should steer clear of. I went through this list and thought, this is the dream. This would be a really nice gift package if anyone's thinking about stuff to get me over the festive
Can I have
season.
the Botox voucher?
Because what they're saying is Christmas gifts should say stuff like, I appreciate you as you are, and not, here's how you could be better.
Oh, what a
And I think it
carry-on.
depends on the person. But it very much depends on the person, because some people you could buy a gift for. I think that any of these, if I bought them for someone like you, or if someone bought them for me, I think I'd be ecstatic with these gifts, and I think you'd also be quite overjoyed
So
with them.
happy.
But I know a lot of friends who could, for some reason, see it as something that has been passive-aggressive in terms of lose a bit of weight.
So I go to a really expensive gym.
And that's that off the list.
Public service announcement. I would absolutely love someone to pay for my gym for a year. It would save me lots of money. Also, I was thinking of getting my boyfriend an Apple Watch for Christmas. He doesn't
Great
watch
gift.
the show, so he won't know, but I think it's a good watch. And also, I love the idea of a Botox voucher. I think that's a good gift, spend money on that every 3 months. I don't know what you think, Michael, but I also think self-help books are quite nice sometimes. I've been bought so many self-help books for my birthday. I don't know what it says about me.
Take the hint.
But I think if somebody is close enough to you to buy a gift, then I think they probably have a little bit more of a right to not critique you, but to give you a little bit of friendly advice. And I think the friendly advice, if you get a book saying how not to be an asshat,
Yeah.
but you get it from a friend who's close enough to give you a gift,
Yeah.
then that is maybe an opportunity for you to become a little bit more self-reflective, which apparently you haven't been because you've been an asshat.
Yes.
I did buy, and this is from my coach who works with me on the radio, and this is a public apology, but I did buy her a weighing scales that was Bluetooth connected because it was high tech, and it monitored your weight and said when you would yo-yoed up or down or anything like that, on the basis that I thought that's a nice keep yourself in check. And she'd continuously mentioned about how she was doing fitness regimes and she was making sure she was eating healthy, and I thought that's a good gift. It went down like a lead balloon, and I've never let it down. It's been about it's pre-COVID. It's been about 6 years. So I think you have to read the person beforehand and know if you're at that level or not.
That's
Otherwise, your friendship is kind of on the brink here.
That is a good point. I was thinking of buying some slimming tea for people.
But then there are people that I would like to not have a close relationship with in some of these gifts.
gift.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, that's so true. No, but I think those gifts are expensive gifts. Botox vouchers, gym memberships, Apple Watches. Anyway, let's move on. Michael, I absolutely love Jennifer Lopez. I always thought that, she was the queen of the gym, talking about gyms. But tell us about J-Lo's latest gig.
So I'm going to use the piece of paper to read this off because I want to make sure I get the numbers right. So J-Lo has done it for $2 million. She did it this weekend. In the past, in 2006, she did it for $2.8 million. Beyonce has done it for $4.7 million in 2018. Christina Aguilera did it for $3.6 million in 2005. And what they have all done is performed privately, in some cases for Russian billionaire weddings, for Russian billionaire parties. This most recent weekend, J-Lo with the $2 million, it was for the wedding of two very successful Indian families, tech billionaires. But the one that I'm most intrigued by is a gentleman by the name of David Bonderman, who's a private equity billionaire. He paid, you're going to have to guess, in 2002, November actually, in 2002, to the Rolling Stones for a performance in Vegas. They played for 400 guests, and they played 17 songs. How much do you think he paid the Rolling Stones? This would have been 23 years ago.
10 million.
Oh, no, easily 30.
10 million?
Easily
Oh,
30
am I
million.
too low?
You are too low. You're too high.
Oh,
30.
20?
Oh,
18.7 million.
Wow.
17 songs for 400 people.
that's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. And I think that there is a whole shadow world out there that, well, maybe you know about, but we don't know about, where celebrities are paid ridiculous amounts of money either to perform or to give speeches or to just hang out. And that's the market that I think you and I need to get in on.
Definitely.
He obviously has it cornered.
Yeah.
So I think what
Jono
this
is like the
if someone-
social butterfly of Dubai, if no one knows this.
Look.
Everybody in Dubai knows Jono. Jono does so many events. He basically runs Dubai's social life.
Certainly after 8 p.m.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, after it.
Yeah.
If you, and I think it's a case of if you have the cash to do it, you may as well do it. People like Teddy Swims, who performed here just last week, will perform for private gigs, such as air show galas and anything else that goes along with it, if the price tag is correct. This is their sideline gig. This is effectively the same as a freelancer job. And they will do these gigs and make a stack of money. What I have noticed is the trend that J-Lo is getting cheaper over the years, which is very promising news, that she might be eventually affordable for a wedding or a birthday party in the near future. But she's crazy money.
But she still looks as good as she was.
Absolutely.
In fact, she looks better than when she was Jenny on the Block.
I must admit something. I don't think we can ever fault J-Lo. J-Lo
Yeah.
has some serious tunes. J-Lo's been giving us the goods for years and years. She was in Abu Dhabi recently performing, actually.
Correct. And I
Very
think
sad. I
front
missed.
row seat was, and I could be wrong on this, the approximate value was about $1,000, which is Vegas prices.
Would you pay 2.6 million? Or how much did they pay for J-Lo?
This one, most recently this weekend, 2 million.
2 million.
It's getting cheaper. It's
But,
down to
Getting
2.6.
that's down. In 2007, it was 2.8.
A lot cheaper.
But I also wonder if it's maybe the clients. In 2008, it was for a Russian billionaire.
Oh, yeah.
Now it's for a
Or maybe
an
it's
Indian
after her
billionaire.
divorce from Ben Affleck. I mean,
yeah,
know.
you tailor it. You
Yeah.
tailor it for who the client is.
Anyway, we'll move on. Thanks to tonight's guests, Dubai 92 presenter Jono Hayes and managing director of This is Dubai, Michael Jabri Pickett. And that's all from us on W News Extra. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Of course, follow us on X. G&T will be coming up next. Goodbye and thank you.